So I'm just going to start and waste almost some of my very precious 15 minutes by advertising other things. We're doing some research on research. So there's a survey out, which I've put on Twitter. So I'd like to ask people to take part in our research. And also we have a research book club, which is happening the first Thursday of every month. And so if anyone would like to take part, then please again look on Twitter and you can get the details. But this is my actual presentation. So I'm Jane Waite. I'm presenting today on a project called a project around the use of design in teaching primary programming. So that's pupils from the age of 5 to 11. The abstract was authored by myself and Professor Paul Curzon at Queen Mary University of London. And this abstract is just the description of the method that has been used for the third and final part of my PhD. My PhD is at Queen Mary University of London with Paul Curzon, William Marsh and Sue Sentence. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to use the structure of the abstract. So there's a background and context, research focus, method, findings, conclusions. And if we have time at the end, I'm going to look at a couple of the concepts within the current design models. So here we go. So the background and context. So since 2014 in England, 11-year-olds are required to know how to design simple programs. So that's part of our program of study. But there's very little research being done in this area. As part of my PhD and an earlier part of the research, I undertook a survey of over 200 teachers. And what we found was that design was seen as being very important by teachers as they're teaching programming, but they're not actually doing it. So they weren't converting their view of design as being something they needed to do in practice. And that was because of a number of difficulties that were revealed. And the difficulties that came to light, again, from the survey, there were 6 main difficulties. So there was a confusion over what an algorithm was. There was resistance to design by pupils. There was a lack of time to do design in class, a lack of pupil expertise in design, conflicting pedagogies and a lack of resources, and a lack of teacher expertise. In order to start to address 3 of those elements, this next study looks at how we can start to maybe provide CPD for teachers in the teaching of design in programming projects. So that's our research focus. So the research focus is to start to understand more about design and to provide CPD. But in order to create CPD, we need to understand the underpinning concepts, but these have not yet been defined. So each step, we're kind of taking another step backwards in a sense to get at the core of what design is about. So in order to understand what the concepts are, we've been working with expert teachers to develop a design toolkit. And like the previous presenter, then we've been looking at involving teachers in that process using a participatory design approach and a design-based approach. And this abstract is just looking at that approach that we took to incorporate and involve the teachers. So the method that we have had of creating the toolkit was a first version was created from a synthesis of literature, along with using the outcomes from our first 2 studies. The first study was an interview of 5 teachers and 50 pupils, and then our survey of over 200 teachers. And that first version, that pilot, was then used in a CPD event with a number of teachers, and they gave us feedback on that, and that gave us our next version. And then that post-pilot version then was reviewed by an expert in the field, particularly to ensure that we'd kept all the technical content right and that it was all kind of cohesive and still worked all together. And then that became our third version, which is what we've been using with our expert group. And then I'm going to explain how they've been involved with that. And after we've we've incorporated all their feedback. That'll become another version, and that version will go back to them, which they will review again, and then we'll get our final version. So it's this kind of iterative process of continually improving it based on input from different groups of individuals, and then that will be shared with a wider audience once we've got our final version. And maybe after I finish my PhD, then we can do some more work on it. So let's look at the expert group phase. So the expert group phase started with participant recruitment, and that was done by sharing a survey across a range of different social media platforms, and teachers were asked to register if they'd like to take part, and 56 teachers registered. But we were asking for expert teachers, so we were asking for teachers who'd already were using design in their primary programming practice, because what we'd found in our earlier surveys and studies was that there's this growing group of teachers who are moving forward quite rapidly in terms of teaching programming, and we wanted to utilize that expertise. So it was very much it was a focused group that we were trying to get at. We then ranked our respondents based on expertise, including things like confidence to teach programming, confidence to teach design, how long they'd been teaching programming, how long they'd been teaching with design. And then we went out and we interviewed teachers, and these were face-to-face interviews. Thank goodness that we did it last year. And they were geographically spread from southwest England to Scotland, and it was over just 3 months, over one term. And we kept an eye on the responses that were coming back from our teachers, and we stopped interviewing once we got to what's called saturation point, so where we weren't having lots of new and extra ideas being kind of fed back to us. And we ended up interviewing 28 teachers, which just happened completely by accident really, but half were female and half were male. And the method that we took with the teachers was, it was quite a long interview, usually about 2 to 3 hours. And each teacher was given a paper-based version of the concepts, which were presented in what was called a toolkit. And for each concept, the teachers read. So in our interviews, quite a lot of the time on the recordings is quiet because teachers are reading. Then we demonstrated to the teachers how to apply the concept to a sample activity using a Think Aloud protocol. And then the teachers applied that concept to their own teaching activity, again using a Think Aloud concept. We then discussed the concept, and teachers made lots and lots of suggestions about how to change things. And finally, we looked at the overall toolkit with them. So our findings were that teachers successfully applied each concept to their lesson activity. Every teacher chose a different activity to review. They picked activities from within what they already taught. And again, just completely by accident, there were unplugged lessons, there were animations, activities, quizzes, games, physical computing, a very wide range of what we call genre. And teachers suggested many ways to improve the toolkit, and that's what we're writing up now, including adding extra detail, changing definitions, adding examples, and some of the concepts were will radically change because of their feedback. But there was a broad agreement that some concepts were more useful to novice teachers than others. But we asked teachers to rank the order of that concepts might be shared with teachers of different levels of expertise or within their careers. But generally, all concepts were useful to experienced teachers who were developing resources and CPD for others. So the conclusions are that we've co-developed a set of design concepts with teachers through this kind of process of participation of different groups of educators, and these we've also evidence that these can be used to review and compare teaching and learning activities and to guide creation of resources. And we've actually already delivered some of the material through CPD at the CAS London conference. But further research is now needed to evaluate the concepts. We've kind of started to develop these building blocks, but now we've got to work out whether they have impact. So will introducing these have an impact on pupil progress? And are these concepts as well? They might be useful within our primary English context, but are they useful to a wider audience, to teachers perhaps teaching older learners, or to people in different countries? So that's the conclusions and implications. The abstract was focused on the approach that we took, but in review of the abstract, the people who were kind of reviewing it, they all asked us to know more about the actual design toolkit models and concepts. So I'm going to look at those briefly, but I have to say that with a big caveat, because we're in the middle of developing them. So they may change, and also we've not yet published on this. So I'm going to just introduce a couple of the concepts. So the first is the design formats. And it's this idea that when pupils or anybody creates a design, then it's represented through a format, and it's kind of this continuum of different formats. So it might just be in children's heads, it might be that they physically enact a design with or without manipulatives, so that's without representations of whatever is being designed. They might be recorded or not. They might just say their design. They might draw it. And I think the drawn designs are the ones that are often most familiar to our teachers. So that's things like labeled diagrams, storyboards, concept maps. And then written designs could just be the annotations on those drawn formats or informal pseudocode. And then sometimes designs don't seem to exist anywhere, and that they're implied through the actual code or the program settings. But the question then is, what are the parts of the design? So, is it just the algorithm? And from that has come this concept of the design components, which are the basic building blocks of primary programming projects. And the first building block is an object and data design. So that's this idea of what are the names of the objects. I'm just tapping the top of my head to show that that's the name. What do the objects do? So I'm putting my little hands by the side as I'm running, and that's the algorithm design. And then there's what do the objects and sounds look and sound like? So I'm putting my hand to my eye and to my ear. So there's this idea of these basic building blocks, and we can describe those a bit more formally for older learners by saying that they're what objects are needed, what data is saved, such as the names of the scenes and characters, what action will occur in its order for the algorithm, and the idea that this controls the objects and the data. And so if you can see there, this problem that we have for teachers, that they don't quite know where the algorithm sits, this component particularly addresses this issue to help everybody know more clearly what the algorithm is. And then the artwork and the sounds, it's what you might hear and see. And in action, if we look at Viking Raid, which is a barefoot activity, the algorithms are the numbered steps and the speech bubbles that are numbered and the arrow that's on the design. The artwork is just the images that have been used, and the objects are the names of the characters. So you can see here on Viking Raid, there's a Viking, a monk, and some gold coins, and the name of the scene, a churchyard scene. And again, here I've got a labeled diagram at the top, and I've got a storyboard at the bottom. And you yourselves, you can think, well, what are the objects? Where is the artwork? And where are the algorithms? So we're starting to help teachers to be more specific in terms of what they're teaching in terms of design. And that's the end. This is the overall design artifact model, but as I said before, that's very draft. So questions and answers.